Greetings, everyone. Let's talk about aging deer by their tooth wear and the replacement. That's right, we've got to talk about jaws. So I've got 3 pieces of background information for you. First, this technique was developed right here in New York State. Severinghaus, that's the guy down there in the photo holding the board with the deer jaws on it. He developed this technique all the way back in the 1940s. It's been adapted since then, a bit refined. We know a bit more, but the essential components of this technique are the same. Second, whenever you're handed a deer jaw, the assumption is that that is from a fall deer. And the reason for that is that's when our hunting season is. So the DEC is collecting the vast amount of their data from deer that are hunted. And since deer are born in the spring, like this little fella here, that means that every jaw is going to have 0.5 added to its age. So if deer are born in the spring and then killed in the fall, they're either a half-year-old, 1.5 years old, 2.5, etc. Finally, you should acknowledge that deer with different diets, of course their teeth are going to wear down at different rates, and biologists can sometimes take that into account. I heard from a gentleman in Florida that the deer in the Everglades National Park are eating so much sawgrass that their teeth are wearing down faster because of the silica that the sawgrass picks up from the soil. So they have to adjust their measurements of the tooth wear to take the diet of the deer into account. Okay, let's talk about tooth replacement first. Tooth replacement works because deer have premolars, which start life as baby teeth. And as those teeth drop out and become permanent, they can give us clues to the deer's age. I want to thank the Indiana Department of Natural Resources for the pictures that I took from their website. First, in an adult deer, you're going to have 6 cheek teeth. So we're not looking at the whole jaw here, right? There's a front part of the jaw here. There's a back part of the jaw over here. And you can see all 6 of the teeth are all outlined for you by the DNR folks. These are the 3 premolars. Okay, these are going to be important in the beginning of our story here. These are the ones that get replaced, and the ones that are shown here are replaced, in fact, and are all adult teeth. Now, the easiest way to tell that a deer is a fawn, or a young of the year, or a half-year-old, is that it has less than 6 cheek teeth. It still has molars that are erupting. So let's start from the beginning. You've got teeth 1 through 4 all erupted. Tooth 5 is just starting to break through the gum. If there was still flesh on this, if this was a live deer, we would see that. Tooth 6 isn't even a thing yet. So we can tell that this is a fawn because we're looking at fewer than 6 teeth. And that one's simple. If I give you that on a quiz, everybody should get that right. A yearling, or 1.5-year-old deer, has still retained its baby teeth, and the easiest baby tooth to see is tooth number 3. Tooth number 3, when it is a milk tooth or a baby tooth, is tricuspid. Tricuspid means it's got 3 cusps. 1, 2, 3. A tooth that only has 2 cusps, like tooth number 5 here, is called a bicuspid. 1, 2. I imagine a tooth with only 1 cusp is a unicuspid, and I think OK cuspid is a dating site for dentists. An adult tooth 3 is going to be a bicuspid. So if I count 6 teeth and the 3rd tooth has 3 cusps, it's a yearling. It's a 1.5-year-old deer. Hey, I do want to point out that in my other video I talked to you guys about aging. I just want to say it one more time to you. A fawn is a deer in the first calendar year of its life. So if a deer was born in 2019, it will be a fawn until December 31st. On January 1, it becomes a yearling, and it stays a yearling until December 31st of the next year. So hunters never like to be told they shot a fawn. Oh, and it's not a fawn, it doesn't have spots. Well, it was born this year, and it's only 6 months old. So we'll call it a young of the year, and then we don't have to use that F word. It's kind of funny because as I was preparing this lecture, I found a deer jaw on a hike And I do want to point out to you again, so I told you the two things to do. First is tell which is the front of the jaw, right? And here's the back end over here. And then start counting the teeth. So in this guy, as is often in teeth that you find or jaws that you find, there's a tooth missing. Then here's tooth number 2. Here's tooth number 3, 4, 5, and then tooth 6 in the back here. So we obviously have a deer that is not a fawn because it has all 6 of its teeth. If a deer has all its adult teeth, there's no premolars left, then it has to be at least 2.5 years old. And I'm going to stop you guys right here because if that's all you can tell, if you start getting confused as we go into the tooth wear part, you know, you're still pretty good. If you can pick up a deer jaw and you can say, wow, it's at least 2.5 years old, or you can say with confidence that it's a half year or 1.5, you're doing way better than the vast majority of people. But here's the key. Here's what makes this for sure a 2.5-year-old deer. It's the fact that all of its cheek teeth, including the easiest one to determine, tooth number 3, are all adults. Notice that this is a bicuspid tooth. There's one cusp, there's the other. If I can go backwards one slide and show you this deer that I just found, here's tooth 1 that's missing, here's tooth 2, here's tooth 3, right? Notice how it's tricuspid. So this is a baby tooth. So this deer is 1.5 years old. And I'm certain of that because it still has a baby tooth here for its last premolar. This deer is not 1.5 years old. It's older because tooth number 3, the baby tooth has fallen out and the adult tooth is here. So once we get to this stage, now it's all about tooth wear. And before I get into the tooth wear, I do want to give you another resource you could look at if you were interested for tooth replacement. The folks at Quality Deer Management Association, they've got a bunch of videos on their site. You're welcome to look at all of them. They're interesting. They're going to tell you the same thing that I just did. They're going to tell you in a southern accent, though. So if you have an interest, that is the exact title of their video on YouTube. There's the YouTube link. It's a little hard to, give you a link for a video in a video, but I also posted this link on Blackboard. So if you're interested in looking for it that way, that might be easy for you to do. Okay, now we have to talk about tooth wear. So tooth wear is all about understanding the two parts of the tooth, dentine and enamel. Enamel is the hard outer covering. Dentine is the dark tissue that's underneath it. And as the tooth wears down, what wears away? The outside, the enamel part. The more the enamel wears away, the more the dentine gets exposed, and the dark area gets wider and wider. Boy, it's a good thing I found this deer jaw, isn't it? Let me give you one last piece of vocabulary here. I want to look at that tooth, right? So this is a bicuspid tooth right here. It's got 2 cusps to it. But I want to teach you one more tooth part. We learned enamel. That's this white part. We learned dentine. That's this dark part. But I want to teach you one other part, and that is the lingual crest. Now, as you're jotting lingual crest down in your notes, I want to tell you that I've been focusing so far on which part of the jaw goes towards the front and which part of the jaw goes towards the back. The other thing you need to know is which part of the jaw was closest to the tongue and which side of the jaw was closest to the cheek. And these lingual crests here, these tallest parts of the tooth, sorry, you got to do them all once I get started. Those are the ones that are closest to the tongue. The way to remember that is the lingual side of the jaw is the side that touches your tongue. You need your tongue for talking, for your linguistics. Lingual means talking, so this is the tongue side. We pretty much just ignore the other side of the tooth here, and we certainly are ignoring this part of the tooth for my lecture. This is the cheek side. So we're not interested in that. We're only interested in the lingual crests. Take a moment to read that. As the tooth gets older, the peaks wear and the dentine shows through more. Nothing new. I told you that already. But let's have a look at it in practice here. And I grabbed 2 pictures off of their website, and I just lined them up so we can compare tooth to tooth. And the younger deer is on top. It says it's 2.5 years old. And the older deer that they claim is 5.5 years old is at the bottom. Just take a look here. Let's just focus in on just this half of this tooth. And look at how different it looks than that half of that tooth there. As that tooth gets older, it wears down. So it's getting shorter, but more and more of that dark is showing. Now I chose this tooth to look at because that is tooth number 4. It turns out, something for you to remember, that tooth 4, or M1, as they're calling it here, molar 1, is the oldest tooth in the mouth. That's because all 3 of the premolars were started life inside the jaw, and they had baby teeth over the top of them, remember? So all these teeth have already had baby teeth on top of them. Then when the adult teeth came in, tooth 4 was already in the jaw, and tooth 4 gets the nod as the oldest tooth in the mouth. All right, before we start talking about wear, we're going to just recap one more time. The young of the year are 0.5. The yearlings are 1.5. They're aged by tooth replacement. Deer that are 2.5 years and older are aged by tooth wear. And again, all of the images that I'm going to show you are from the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. All right, so I get this jaw. I count teeth. There's 6 teeth. It's not a fawn. I look at tooth number 3. Tooth number 3 is bicuspid, so it's not 1.5 years old. Now I know I must look for wear. So I go to tooth 4 here, and the difficulty in showing you the wear here is that it's hard to see what exactly is the top of the tooth. So I'll try to draw it in on both of these here so you can see. Whoop, that was a terrible job. So let's look at this tooth where I did a better job. Look how wide the enamel is. Look how narrow the dentine is. Look how wide the enamel is. The 4th tooth has thinner dentine than enamel, and the ridges stay sharp. There's not enough wear on this tooth for me to call it anything older than 2.5. Everybody good? Okay. Essentially what I'm asking you to do is pretend that that tooth is America's favorite cookie, the Oreo. Hey, it may not be my favorite cookie, but it's America's favorite. Let's look at it again. So you've got like the Oreo cookie, you've got one part here, then you've got the middle, then you've got another part here. Okay? That's what I'm trying to talk about when I'm talking Oreo. So let's look again. Sorry, I'll start all the way from the basics. I counted the teeth. There's 6 teeth, so it's not a fawn. I looked at tooth number 3. It's bicuspid. It's an adult tooth, so it's not 1.5 years old. But now, when I go to look at the wear on tooth 4, it is worn. Look how wide that dentine is. So because of that, I go to tooth number 5. But in tooth number 5, especially this cusp, look how narrow that enamel is. So I can see that tooth number 5 doesn't show wear, so I go back to tooth 4 and say tooth 4 is the one that shows the wear. That means it's a 3.5-year-old deer. Once tooth 5 shows wear, it's going to be a 4.5-year-old deer. By the way, look at how worn down tooth 4 is now. Now, nobody's going to argue that there's not a lot of wear on that tooth. Nobody should argue there's not enough wear on this tooth. When you get to this one, though, it is thinner than this white. So I'm going to say that this is a 4.5-year-old deer. By the time I get to 5.5 and up, okay, 5.5 and older, all 6 of the teeth are going to show considerable wear, so that they're going to be showing the dentine here wider than the enamel is. And I do want you to see that this category here on the Indiana DNR website, they're not willing to go to 6.5, 7.5, 8.5 years old. They're just like, look, by the time you get to the last tooth that's got wear, it's at least 5.5 years, and we got to call it a day. Can I go forward here for a minute and re-look at tooth 4? Would you look at how wide that dentine is? It's worth looking at some of these older pictures and looking at more than just the 2 teeth that you have to look at to determine age. All right, you ready for my pro tip? Here it is. It's all about rounding up. So if you ask yourself which tooth shows the wear, that's the rounded up age of the deer. So if it's the 4th tooth that shows the wear, it's a 3.5-year-old deer. If it's the 6th tooth that shows the wear, it's a 5.5-year-old deer. All you did was round up. It's just a trick way to remember which tooth should be showing the wear. It works well for me. It's a good reminder. Now, I did tell you that not only does the enamel wear out so that the dentine gets more exposed, but also the peaks on those lingual crests get lower. And I just want to show you this a little bit because it's almost like going through time. So if you look at this one, there's a young deer, 2.5 years old. Look how sharp these peaks are. Here is a 3.5-year-old deer. Look how much more rounded those peaks are. Okay. And then a 4.5-year-old deer. Wow, those peaks are just ridiculous. Eroded right down. Now you can see these peaks are rounded as well, while these ones remain sharp. And finally, when you get to our oldest deer, not only do all of these teeth show wear, but they're taking you all the way back to tooth number 3 and saying, yeah, he's super worn down as well. I would just say that this last technique, now obviously I went through it very quickly, right? This is just a little bit of a way to give yourself some confidence that you're looking at what you think you're looking at. And I do want to warn you that since this original study, there have been studies testing how accurate it is, and they've found that it's not 100% accurate. There's an expression that statisticians use, and they say the only thing worse than no data is bad data. Does that make sense to you? Because if I have bad data, it's going to lead me to make poor conclusions when I think I'm making good ones. So right now, the DEC has decided we're only going to age deer until the data gets too bad. Does that make sense? So here, check it out. Here's what I mean to say. If we look at this box right here, here's the age classes that you're allowed to do when the DEC biologist or technician checks in a deer. Let's say this is at a butcher. You can call that deer young of the year, which we know is fawn or year and a half. I'm sorry, not a year and a half. I'm already looking ahead. A fawn or a half-year-old deer. A year and a half or a yearling. 2.5 or 3.5 and over. Like they've decided that once you get any farther than that it's too inaccurate. There's too many variables, and the deer is no longer showing you its true age. I don't know how you feel about this, but I like this because what it basically breaks the deer down into is yearlings, adult, and mature. That's a great way to think about this, okay? The Quality Deer Management Association also has a video on tooth wear, and I would encourage you to watch it. They've got some great information on there, and it will really reinforce the categories that I just talked about with you. And in addition, you can take their quiz. And everybody should be taking the quiz because that's a great way for you to really see if you're understanding this concept or not. I'm sure there's more that you can find on YouTube. With the lack of us being able to handle deer jaws, this is the next best thing for you guys. Speaking of quizzes, let's play a little game here. So, how old is this guy? Hold on. What's the first thing I told you to do? Orient the jaw to which is the front and which is the back. And you can see that I'm holding the back of the jaw. Good. Well, if you said older than dirt or a boomer or a senior citizen, you are correct in all of those. Let's outline the teeth. There's tooth 2, there's tooth 3, 4, 5, and then tooth 6. What in the world has happened to tooth 4? Well, the answer here is tooth 4 is the oldest tooth in the mouth. So it should show the most wear. Guys, this is a ridiculously old deer. I'm going to say maybe 9.5, 10.5 years old without question. By the time they're like this, they're kind of gumming their food. It's very hard to get good, proper nutrition. All right. Now notice it doesn't ask you what age is this deer. It asks you what's happening here. Sorry. Start with which is the front. Here's the front. Okay. So that means tooth 1, tooth 2. And here's where it gets tricky. What in the heck is going on over here? When I start at the bottom, it looks easy. But where does tooth 3 end? If it ends right here, okay, and I go back, there's tooth 6. Okay. There's tooth 5. What exactly am I looking at here? This is a chunk of milk tooth that didn't fall away, instead got wedged in between the other teeth. Now you're looking at the cheek side of the jaw, and there's tooth 1, tooth 2. Tooth 3 is much easier to make out now, and tooth 4 is easy to make out now. And you can see this piece in the middle here that's bridging them together is just a wedged in chunk of baby tooth that's still stuck there. Maybe it would have worn away and, as this deer got older and then finally wiggle its way out. But what a weird looking thing, huh? How about an age on this deer? Stick yourself out there. You can pause this, look at it for as long as you want to. But before you do, I would like to show you tooth 1 is missing. There's tooth 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's got all 6 of its teeth. What do we look at next? Tooth 3 is bicuspid. So that means it's an adult tooth, so we're not looking at a 1.5 year old deer. And now the question is there enough wear here for us to warrant going to look at tooth number 5? And I think there is. Look how wide this is, especially this one. Look how wide that is. This seems to me much bigger than the width of the enamel. So I'm going to say we should go to tooth 5. But when I look at tooth 5, look how thin the enamel looks again. Tooth 5 does not look like it's worn. So if you ask me which tooth is worn, I would say tooth 4. And that would give me an age of 3.5. Because we take the tooth, and that's the rounded up version of the age. So 3.5-year-old deer. I will say that on a test, I would have accepted 4.5 if we were still doing in-person quizzes this semester. Because especially when you're just learning, guys, I want to make sure you know what I think it is, but then I want you to have some positive credit if you got close. It takes a while to learn all this. Faust is way better at this than I am. Hey, how about age on this one? I'm willing to bet some of you guys are psyching yourself out. In fact, this is a super easy question. Let's just count teeth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's tooth 6 erupting from the jaw. So we know the age of this. This is a half-year-old deer. In fact, look at tooth 5. It's not even fully erupted yet. It's not even as tall as it's supposed to be. So we end up with a fawn here because it has less than 6 teeth. But maybe you looked at the front and said, my gosh, look how worn these teeth are. How can this be a fawn if these are worn? Well, it's a tricuspid tooth, so that means this is one of the milk teeth. All 3 of these are milk teeth. Milk teeth are not made as well as permanent teeth. They wear down very quickly. They're cheap. All right, last question. Which deer is older? Well, if you said the white jaw, the longer one, that's because you're normal, right? The bigger jaw must be the older one. But check it out. This is exactly the same jaw that I just showed you in the last slide. There's those 3 front teeth. Tooth 4, tooth 5 is not quite in yet, and tooth 6 is just starting to break through here. So this is a fawn. What's the age of this jaw? Well, if we look at it a little bit closer, you can see that it's missing tooth 1. There's tooth 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How can this jaw be smaller but have more teeth than the other jaw? Well, if your answer was it's a different species, I got to give you credit. That's some good thinking. It's not true. This is a whitetail, but it would be accurate to think, there's some deer species that don't grow as big as others. But there's some white-tailed deer that don't grow as big as others either. We've actually looked at this jaw once already. This is the one that I aged with you at 3.5 years old. Look familiar? You can go back and have a look if you want to. This tiny little jaw was from a Florida key deer. And that's why it's so small, even though it is an adult. Key deer just grow to the size of German shepherds. I'm not sure where this exactly came from. I have to confess, for years I thought it was just legally hunted. It's dated 1963 on it, so I assumed it was a deer that was shot in 1963. But it doesn't appear that they had a hunting season in 1963. So maybe this is part of a roadkill deer survey that was done. I'd love to hear the story behind this. But this one and a few others are in the FLCC collection, ready to confuse you, ready to be trick questions on any quiz. Hey, thanks for showing up. I really appreciate it. You guys check out all the other stuff that I have for deer aging available to you this semester.